Good morning. It's 7:30-ish and it's Friday morning, so it must be time for coffee, buses and politics. We're joined this week by Henry Midgley, an old friend of mine and an associate professor at the University of Durham in accounting and formerly of the National Audit Office. Henry, we're going to be talking about the National Audit Office in a moment, and so Henry was the NAO refute didn't or qualified the whole of government accounts. So we're going to be talking about that a bit. As a couple of us are sitting in Huntingdon, home of one Mr. O. Cromwell, I do have to point out that Henry knows more about the Civil War than I should think most people. His PhD was on. Actually, Henry, what was your PhD on? Because I can't remember the title.
It was on the political thinking of the New Model Army. So I was examining kind of their ideas and what they were thinking they were up to between 1647, so the end of the First Civil War, and 1654 when Cromwell became Lord Protector of England. Yeah. And that takes you through the Second Civil War and a kind of later addendum involving battles at places like Worcester. I always like to think of Worcester having battles. Surbiton.
So presumably that's the Battle of Surbiton doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it? So presumably that's things like the Putney debates as well.
Yeah, so including the Putney debates running up through the trial of the king in 1649 and what they were thinking of, and of course the invasions of Scotland and Ireland, because the Civil War is one of the points, I think, when you really have a British history rather than just in English or Scottish or Welsh or Irish.
Yeah. So I think probably just one thing to mention at the beginning, people may have seen that the Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, has resigned. Which is, as people probably know, I rather like Louise Haigh. And this feels like a bit of a blow. Yeah. So this is, I had a little look at this. So in 2013, when she was a parliamentary candidate, she had a bag pinched off her and told the police it had a work phone in it. She later found the work phone, and her lawyer said not to comment during the police interview, and she received a discharge at, so technically guilty, but she screwed up. It seems she may have got bad advice from a lawyer when she was a candidate in 2013, but it's a real, I think it's a real shame, both because I thought she was doing good work, but also to lose a Secretary of State in the government is a blow. I mean, bearing in mind that buses, obviously of interest to us, but she was doing buses, rail nationalisation, and so on. So it does feel like a bit of a loss. It'll be interesting to see how it's handled and who replaces her, because I think she has big shoes to fill.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I understand the context, because it was like a decade ago, wasn't it? And it seems like a relatively minor thing, when we all make mistakes. And given, I mean, I'm all about standards in public life, but given what we've experienced recently from politicians, it seems like pretty small fry, doesn't it? So quite sad for her.
I'm absolutely behind you, Stephen. Actually, I've just sat and read the story and just going through it and thinking I can't quite work out why she's resigned. It doesn't seem sort of serious, when you think about all the other stuff that's gone on.
Yeah, I have to say as well, I have to look into more detail. I just read the story this morning, but it appears that's a minor offense that was really known for years. And I would have thought if it's something serious, you don't get the appointment in the first place. So yes, I think, it does show, I think overall, the fact that the higher up you are in those positions of power, the more like, you would probably get some of those things from the distant past in the press, and then you'll have to make a decision whether to continue with it and explain it or to resign. In this case, it seems decision to resign.
I would suggest that if this had happened in Boris Johnson's government, this wouldn't have been a resignation. And you sit and think, what's driven it, and is it the fact that the Prime Minister said, look, I'm expecting the highest standards, you've got to go, or has she made a decision early to go, and it might be a bit of a misjudgment to decide she's got to go over it, to be honest.
I mean, there was also the she did. I mean, I have to. I agreed with her, but she called P&O Ferries a rogue operator. I think it was. And yeah.
Well, yeah, the rogue operator thing was very, very difficult for the government. There's no two ways about it. But and that, but that it's a slightly different issue, and those things are going to catch you and bite you on the bum when you come into government. There's a reality there.
Okay, let's talk about the National Audit Office. So the story here is that the National Audit Office has disclaimed the whole of government accounts, basically because the bits coming from local government weren't felt to be reliable. So I forget the exact figures. Some local authorities got their figures in, audited on time. Some got their figures in but not audited, and some didn't get anything in. So I thought maybe we could just do, Henry, a few quick questions, and then maybe get into a bit more of a discussion about what it all means. So I suppose the first question, and hopefully you'll be able to answer this as somebody who teaches accounting and worked at the NAO. What's an audit?
So basically, and this goes across every sector of the economy in which you use an audit. What it is it's a very thorough check that the numbers which are published in the accounts are right. So to give you an idea of what you might do, you might take, let's say, the number in the accounts which represents what a local authority is spent with contractors on, I don't know, social care, and you'll check back that number to a sample of the transactions which underlie it to make sure that they have been correctly reported in the accounts. So as opposed to other numbers which you see published in the public sector, say by the Office for National Statistics or other people, these numbers are thoroughly checked when they are audited to a level of accuracy. So they're not 100% checked, but they are checked to a level of accuracy where you can be reasonably confident that that number is correct. And if you don't have an audit, that means that the numbers haven't basically been checked for correctness. There are some other things that can go on, and there are some sector-specific things as well, but that's the basic concept. We know the number is roughly right if there's been an audit on it.
Right. And I suppose the next question is, so why would you commission an audit, or what is it that you've got the accounts? Here's the accounts. Is the audit just about providing reliability to the accounts you've got?
Well, that's a large part of it. So there are, I should say as well, there are other types of audit, particularly in the public sector. What we're talking about at the moment is a financial audit. There's also a value for money audit. And in local authorities, that has an important aspect. But basically speaking, it's reliability. The other thing that you're getting from an audit is the auditors will go in and kick the tires on the systems which produce the accounts and control money within the organization. And they'll talk to, say, the local authority or the government department or whoever, if they don't think that those systems work very well. So that's another aspect which is really important if you're looking internally, say as a councillor or as a council. It's giving you a lot of insight into what works and what doesn't work within your council. Yeah, go on.
No, go ahead.
So basically, to give you an example of what I mean by that, you do something like, for example, you might go in and look at expense claims and see that how they've been authorized and whether they've been processed correctly and whether the systems have been or are capable of being abused or not. So the auditor will look at systems of control, is what we call it, as well as doing the reliability tests on the accounts. There are some specific things as well in local government, which you'll have a look at. And in central government, for example, you'll look at whether expenditure was authorized by Parliament. So you'll look at things of that nature as well.
And then the body that's been doing this is the NAO. Just briefly, what is the NAO?
So it's really important here to make two distinctions. Okay, so the body that does local government audits, local council audits, will be individual companies, audit companies will do them, and they are procured through something called the Public Sector Appointments, Audit Appointments, I think is the acronym. The NAO isn't actually directly involved in doing the audits of local government accounts. What it does is it audits central government accounts, and one of the things and it does some value for money work in local audit, and it also sets out what local auditors should do in what's called a code of practice. In central government, one of the things it does is it audits this thing called the whole of government accounts. And the whole of government accounts is a massive document that basically tells you the financial balances for the entire UK public sector. Well, the entire UK government, actually, to be careful, because the public sector includes things like Parliament that aren't part of the government. So it should tell you everything that the government has spent, everything that the government has received, everything they owe, and everything they own for the year. It is the most complete record that we have of that, and that is what the NAO has disclaimed.
So I suppose there's a question here then. The whole of government accounts, I was only vaguely aware of. Why does it matter? Why does the whole of government accounts matter?
So it's the most complete record we have of everything that I've just talked about, everything the government owes and owns, and everything they've spent and received during the year. It comes out roughly, it's speeding up, but it comes out roughly a year after the year to which it relates. So the figures that we're looking at the moment are the 2022-2023 whole of government accounts. Mm-hmm. But it's different, for example, from the measures of national debt. So to give you an idea of why that is, the national debt measures that the ONS puts out largely focus on what the UK has borrowed during the year, so things like gilts. Mm-hmm. The whole of government accounts, however, gives you an idea of how much the UK public sector owes in every way it owes money. So the cost of public sector pensions, which has been accrued up to this point, so not the cost of them in the future, but the costs that have been accrued right till now, they're in there. The costs of decommissioning the nuclear power stations that we have built, that's in there. The cost of clinical negligence claims that might be made, that's in there. So the whole of government accounts gives you a far higher figure for the government liabilities than the Office for National Statistics figures give you. And it also gives you all the figures for the government assets. So the rail network, the road network, everything the Ministry of Defence does, and of course, everything local authorities do.
Okay. And this comes on something, and maybe we can start opening this out to everybody. Why aren't local councils getting their audits done?
Oh, wow. That's a huge question. I think if you go back and look at it, this has been a problem that's been building for years. So firstly, the pandemic's clearly had an effect. But secondly, even if you go back to about 2018, around, I've got the figure in front of me. Yeah, in 2018-19, 57% of local government accounts audits were late. Some of this goes back to the reforms to local government audit in the mid-2010s. And the problem with this is that it's cumulative. So that once you've got one audit late, your accounts for last year form your beginning balances for your accounts for this year. So if I don't know what my building was worth last year, I have a problem valuing it this year. And that means that as soon as my audit's late, it becomes harder and harder to keep up. One of the things the government has been doing, actually, of both parties, is trying to insert deadlines in so that we get unaudited accounts, so we start catching up with ourselves. But one of the problems here is that this is cumulative. As to why it's happening in each individual local authority, there'll be different reasons, but I think the fact is the problem has been building for years and years, and a lot of it has to do with the structure of the audit market for local government.
So there used to be a thing called the Audit Commission.
Yeah.
Which was the NAO for local government. Is that fair?
Roughly speaking, so it wasn't independent in the same way that the NAO is. So the NAO is an independent office of the House of Commons. The Audit Commission was under the control of the Department for Communities and Local Government, or whatever its name has changed to this week. And the Audit Commission, but it provided some of the same services. There was a thing called District Audit, which sat underneath the Audit Commission, which provided audits for local councils. And the Audit Commission did a lot of value for money work and commissioned district audit and private sector firms to do the audits of the local councils. So I can't remember the numbers, but some percentage was commissioned out to the private sector.
And so the Audit Commission the Audit Commission doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because it was abolished.
It was.
And it's very hard to continue to exist when you've been abolished. It's one of those curious things. And I think that this was Eric Pickles who abolished it.
Yeah.
So why? I mean, and I don't know, Martin. Do you know Eric Pickles?
I do know Eric. Yeah, I would say I did know Eric. I mean, he's in the House of Lords now, and I haven't spoken to him for a long time. But I used to know Eric very well. He was just to link back to Cambridgeshire, Eric was very good friends with one of the ex-leaders of Cambridge, of Fenland District Council, a guy called Jeff Harper, who was a really good leader, actually, Jeff was. So Eric had some good connections into Cambridgeshire. So when I was leader, it was really easy for me to meet with him and talk to him, yeah.
Oh, cool. That's important.
Really easy, relatively.
Yeah, I mean, I think this thing, the pressures on a minister's time are insane. But I think it was Eric Pickles who abolished the Audit Commission.
Yeah.
And
Eric wanted to get rid of a lot of waste in local government, and to be fair to him, one of the things you look at, and the Audit Commission was one of the things he got rid of. One of the things that he made some mistakes, in my view, within all that. But one of the things for me about Eric was he put his money where his mouth is. He slammed local government funding and financing, in a big way, and constrained local government in terms of council tax increases as well. But the one thing I would say to him, that he takes credit for is, unlike other government departments, he made sure his department took the pain as much as local government took the pain. And there's a lot of evidence of that, and I presume the Audit Commission and the abolition of the Audit Commission fits into that.
I think that's right, and I think there were lots of things around at the time in terms of criticisms of the Commission from conservative sort of inclined people, and some of that was around how close they were to the new Labour government, etc., etc. But I think part of the problem here is, under the umbrella of the Audit Commission, actually that organisation had a number of different kind of structures and things that it did over the years. And the thing I would think of when I think about that abolition was there might have been a way you could have gone back to an earlier version if you wanted to, or done something different. But I'm not sure. I think the result has proved that abolition wasn't necessarily the best option without creating something else to replace it.
I think the evidence of where we are today says that, doesn't it?
Yeah. It is. It's pretty. I was just looking at the figures. The last year, the Audit Commission, 99% of their audited bodies got their audited accounts in on time. As I said, 2018-19, it's down to 57%. Now it's about 12%. And 25% of finance directors in 2019 did not think that their audit team had the appropriate skills and expertise to deliver an opinion on the accounts.
So the question for me is, if you know, for a resident of Cambridgeshire, why does this matter?
So I think there's two things, right? There's a central government answer to that, which is that we won't know these fuller numbers about government and what it does and what it spends, and that's an accountability issue. I haven't looked up Cambridgeshire accounts to see whether they're in the 10% that got their information in accurately, or the 46% that got in audited information, or the 44% didn't get in anything at all. But if they're in the 44% or the 46%, my feeling would be it matters because you don't really know what they did in the year. Because money really in the public sector is a proxy for activity. It's a proxy for what priority you put on stuff. So if you can't look at the accounts and find out what they spent money on, you really can't find out what they did and what they prioritized in that year. And that, I think, is the basic problem.
Yeah, I think that's actually important when you look at what councils are saying about the pressure. As an example, that adult social care spending is putting on council business. If you can't articulate that in money and in financial terms, it starts to call into question everything the council does almost, because you can't articulate and you can't back up that single argument that is the tenet of a lot of top tier councils. Which is that adult social care is killing them.
And the accounts to me are, one of the things that I feel quite passionate about is because of this process of audit, which, trust me, and I've done it, it is incredibly detailed. Because of that process of audit, that information is the gold standard of information. And that's what we haven't got for lots of local authorities. And actually, that's now had an impact on what we have for the whole of government. And those numbers for the whole of government, by the way, feed into things like the OBR's assessment of fiscal risks, etc., etc.
So there's a thing here. So I think if you guys know differently to this, tell me, by the way. But the combined authority is caught up in this, I believe, with some news that came out during the week. And one of the things that bothers me about it, there's almost nothing to see here, Gov, a view from my perspective, in that this isn't the combined authority getting caught up in this. It's not a crisis for the combined authority. It's an audit crisis across local government, is the way I'd put it. And one of the things I'm wary of is we're heading into what is likely to be quite a controversial mayoral election next year. And the issue for me is, somebody is likely to use this and say, the combined authority can't even get its audits done, and this is a crisis, and blah blah blah. And I just wonder where, from your perspective, we should look at this. Should we criticise the combined authority for that, or should we sit there and say this is part of a bigger problem, or both?
I think probably a bit of both. And what you need to know is the reason why the combined authority has struggled. And it could be the national picture, but it could be a local picture as well. And I don't know. But I do think,
I think we're getting
nationally, we should have lots of questions to ask to the department and to ministers, because this is a problem that it's not something that should have surprised them. It's something they should have known about years ago in opposition, and they should have a plan for addressing in government. And the Select Committee last year reported on this and warned that the problem wasn't getting any better. So I think it's really important that we, that ministers address this. But yeah, at the local level, I think you'd need to work out why what was happening was happening.
But it's something. There's no suggestion of any wrongdoing or anything like that. It is an issue of timing and not being able to get your accounts done, or your audit done, rather than there being something wrong highlighted by an audit.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't necessarily mean there's anything. Well, the problem is, of course, without an audit, you haven't gone through the mechanism to show if there is anything wrong, and that's kind of the issue. But yeah, being late with your audit doesn't mean necessarily that something is wrong. It means there has been an issue within the auditors and the local council about getting this stuff done, and that could just be delays, lack of capacity on either side.
I think that the sort of current problem that is the issue, isn't it? That there aren't enough people doing local government audit. There just aren't. Yeah. There aren't enough people in the private sector who want to offer that service.
Yeah, and it's difficult to sort of. I think as well, there's a lack of defined career structures as well for it. So one of the things the District Audit Service and the Audit Commission had is, of course, as you're an organisation, people are going up, they're gaining more experience, they're doing more things. You don't have that necessarily in the firms. So that adds to the problem. Whose main focus is necessarily going to be on the private sector.
Yeah.
So, just so the Cambridgeshire thing fits into the national context is the way I would put it. Yeah.
And I think actually, Dave, what you said there about the audit capacity issues, the sort of number of auditors out there who are experienced who want to do this, that means that even if ministers were to propose big solutions today, it's going to take years for that to work through. To give you an idea, the NAO, I've just written a book on the history of the NAO, and its value for money powers took them at least 10 years to work out how to use them, because you had to get staff who were able to understand things, you had to build precedents, you had to kind of work out where you could push as an auditor and where the departments in that case would push back on you. Now, in local government, even if you recreated something today to do all of this, it's going to take you years to develop that knowledge, that expertise, and that kind of those kind of relationships and sense of the boundaries again.
So we're talking about 10 years before we start to really recover from this properly.
It could be. It depends. I think possibly less than that, but it will take time. So, and I think management might move quicker than it did in the
I think that the thing is, this isn't saying necessarily that Dorsetshire Council has done something, but you don't know, and we know that there's. I suppose there's two things. There's two things here. We don't know, and also the councils themselves may not know. And there's we know that there's been a few. I can't remember what it's called. Councils can't go back. Is it Section 115?
Section 151.
151. Oh, I had the right numbers. Just not.
You had the right numbers.
Yeah, not in the right order. Do they reliably know? If it's about to happen, you've probably got a pretty good idea. But do councils know where they are? If they're 2 or 3 years out from a real problem, do they reliably know where things are? And like I say, what's being done? But also, I think there's also a question about, we're talking, probably most of it is finance delays getting in. Probably is doing a lot of work there. There's also an impact on what this has on, not just an individual local council, but the entire government. There's a lot of money spent through local government, mostly on social care, a lot of it on social care. But it's like, if you've got that uncertainty, how does that affect the government's ability to understand what the state writ large is doing, and its own, like, on a sort of great big macroeconomic level, when it's pulling levers, what's happening? I suppose that's part of the concern as well, that you don't.
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's why, because actually the whole of government accounts is a really good document. I've criticised it in the past for other reasons, but it's a really good document, and it should be and is really useful to people like the OBR and the Treasury. But actually, this messes up the central government numbers as well, because one of the things you do with the whole of government accounts is that you take all. So let's take expenditure. You add together the expenditure of everything in government, but then you subtract the things that they're spending with each other. So when the Home Office, say, does some training with local government, you subtract that because it's in between those two tiers of government. Now, if I haven't got the local government accounts, that becomes much harder to do.
That's the equivalent of a sort of what I would call a recharge within the company, one department billing to another.
Exactly.
It appears on the accounts, but the money isn't actually leaving your organisation, or in this case, the state.
And
go on.
No, and that makes it much harder to tell what these numbers, what even the central government numbers are. So Gareth Davies, the Controller and Auditor General who issued this certificate, he described the impact of it as, large and pervasive, which basically means it's not kind of confined. I think one of the problems that the local area issue, just to respond to your first point, Dave, is that it doesn't help. So you'd hope councils knew where they are financially. You'd hope they knew all sorts of data about themselves. But this process should help them understand their own finances better. And the fact it's not happening won't help them.
I would argue what it also does is what the other issue it has is that for me as a resident, I don't have the assurance that my council is well run. And that is, to me, is really important, especially with the nature of politics as it is, and the Yahoo nature of politics. There are things you've got reference points you can go back to say, actually, let's look at what the audit says about this, what the accounts say, and if you haven't got an assurance that the accounts are right, that's something. But is it also that so councils are spending a lot of money that is grant funded and ring fenced, and I would imagine that audit is one of the ways you get an assurance that that money is being appropriately spent.
Yes, absolutely. And that is absolutely true. So central government departments will also be relying on the audits of local government for that. And to pick up on your point, is one of the other problems that we have is that is the demise of value for money audit in local government.
Yeah.
So if you look at most of the NAO's stuff that gets publicity, it's value for money audit. So, for example, they did something on send children. The Audit Commission used to do things like that on local government. That was one of the things that was abolished in the mid-2010s. And instead, all that the auditors had to sign off on was a statement that local authorities had arrangements in place to secure value for money. And that's a lot less than doing a proper value for money report or publishing proper value for money data. And that again adds to the point you're making, Martin. I think we have an accountability deficit in local authorities.
So this is going to sound, is a value for money audit?
Yeah.
Is that as simple as an audit of whether something is value for money?
So it's an audit. So it's brilliant. It's a term which is kind of invented. So if you go and look at the actual legislation, it will say it's an audit of the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of public spending. Now, those words have never been legally defined, but basically speaking, the economy means cheap, efficiency means cheap per thing I'm trying to do, and effectiveness means achieve the outcomes that the politicians said they would achieve through it. So it's a really important kind of thing that you can do, and there's different ways of doing it, and the Audit Commission had a different approach to the NAO, which has had different approaches for its history, and the Commission had different approaches for its history, but it's less important. We could have an argument about approaches, but it's less important which approach you take than that you do it to begin with.
Yeah.
So this story that we're dealing with at the moment, which is, I'm sitting there and thinking that a lot of residents won't be sort of turned on by it as a story. But is it one of those stories that's going to get bigger and bigger? That as we start to get these accounts, as they start to get through, are we going to start seeing some underlying reasons why these audits have been delayed? As an example, we know that a lot of councils are struggling financially, and is it that these audits are going to bring this out? Or, one of the stories I saw yesterday, because I'm quite sad, I think in the Local Government Chronicle about Woking. Woking have called in the police on the back of an audit on the basis that there are some things that might not be lawful that have gone on. Are we going to start to see this story move from councils haven't been able to get audit done on time to audits? The underlying reason being that there are issues with accounts that auditors are uncomfortable with.
We could do, and equally, the longer this goes on, and the longer we have problems, the more likely you are to have those kind of issues because of the lack of audit. So there's one part of it which is issues that we might discover in this year's audit. There's another part that you're kind of removing a layer of control. So as you remove a layer of control, things may start going wrong as well. So there's kind of two areas that what you're saying is right.
I mean, but I suppose there's two things. There's what it might be picking up is people cooking the books, or is the word malfeasance? But it's the word malfeasance. People deliberately doing something naughty.
It could pick up some of that, yeah.
But I think it's more likely to be a screw up, like a good old fashioned somebody made a mistake.
It will pick up a lot of somebody making mistakes. It will also it could also be a deterrent to malfeasance, particularly large malfeasance. It will pick up. So sort of nicking a couple of pencils, it won't, but it should pick up larger malfeasance. One of the problems I think here is that we just don't know what's going on behind these delayed audit opinions. Most of them probably are administrative issues, but without an audited set of accounts, it's hard to tell. And once you stop auditing for long periods of time, you're creating an environment which permits things to go wrong and to happen.
And I suppose the concern is we know local government is stressed, but also it looks like there is going to be more money put into local government.
Yeah,
and also particularly through the mayor tier, the combined authority tier. And again, it's I suppose with this, it's not it's about how you establish trust in local government or trust in government generally. And I know realistically, not every, most people are not going to be going, oh yes, it's this year's whole of government accounts. Let me turn to the hot graph on page 37. But having a robust process, it's firstly, it actually, I think, doing the audit properly materially makes you, means you know what's going on and hope you're delivering services better. But it's also having the building the confidence in the system as a whole, and that's this is a part of it, that when there's an issue, it's picked up, and that's and that sort of thing, and that's that
was a real strength for the UK. If you'd taken me back to like 2005, or this was something that Britain was good at. We did have good financial statements in both central and local government, which were audited. I have criticisms of the way accounts are compiled, and they could be more useful. But we did have a robust system of audit, and what's really happened is that we've lost that. We don't have that anymore.
And is that it? I mean, I suppose the question then becomes: if we wanted to rebuild that, is it just a case of, and whether whatever structure it is, whether you do that by Audit Commission Mark II or something in a private, something else. Is it by we need to go and get more auditors, or is there something else that would need to be done?
So I think it's important also to note that this is an English problem. It's not a Scottish problem, for example. Scotland has none of these issues. There are different models.
I'm gonna cut across you briefly, Henry.
In terms of audit,
no, English and Welsh problem.
Yeah. So it's a issue that
of Welsh extraction. I know there's that whole Henry VIII laws in Wales thing. We're still a bit bitter about that.
Wales has its own system actually of audit as well, in local government. Yeah. So it's specifically, I think, an English problem.
I apologise. I was completely wrong. You should listen to the professor, not to me.
But what's interesting, of course, is Scotland has a different model where its equivalent of the NAO, which works for the Scottish Parliament, does this job. It's not what I would do because of the parliamentary link, and I think there's a constitutional issue, but there are different ways of doing it. I think what you've got to do is rebuild the capacity, and that means rebuilding the knowledge of local government. Lots of the district auditors could kind of walk into the building and they really knew their local councils very well. And I think that kind of has evaporated. And you've also got to reconstruct, and people talk about what's called a systems leader, somebody who actually takes responsibility for this issue, because currently there's lots of different people involved in lots of different aspects of it. So the firms do the audit, the regulator sets the rules, the NAO sets some of the rules, there are other bodies involved. And actually there's a kind of complicated landscape of who does what and who is accountable for what has gone wrong.
Can I bring in a different topic? Because I think the discussion so far, it's really interesting, but I'm thinking from a resident perspective, like how much residents do actually know about this. And I put a link in the comments, like the Cambridgeshire, like where you can, for those interested, like read different presentations, like the statement of accounts and so on and so forth. But I want to ask a more general question, like for everyone here, really, is to what extent is important to actually have, the elected people, councillors, actually understand this kind of stuff? Because for me, for example, as someone who, didn't have experience in local government, being elected back in 2021, when we're looking at different committees and who can sit on which committees, and you have audit and accounts, like for me, it's like absolutely no way I was done that, because I don't feel I have any expertise whatsoever, like relevant. I think over the years, now that I've started in my non-council job working a bit more on finance, I would feel like a little bit more confident. But I think overall most councillors don't have that expertise, and this could present an issue in terms of like who actually is on those committees that is supposed to provide scrutiny on audit and accounts. I'm not sure if anyone else here, like Martin, obviously Martin had this experience.
I agree completely.
Totally agree.
Yeah, so I wonder what can we do actually to be able to have that elected representative expertise and engagement, because often what I find looking at a few councils on audit and accounts, you have a couple of councillors who are really, have expertise due to their working life or other, or self-studying, and they're really active on this, whereas most of councillors are not really there. Usually when you get those reports with, the financial statements, they usually just like skim read over them or don't really have the questions. And even in committees, you can really notice the people who have expertise on this asking the very detailed questions. Like we have someone who is an accountant asking very helpful questions, one of the committees, and things that other councillors would not probably even think of like asking. No, it's not to say that some people who don't have the expertise or didn't study this can't have good questions. Like I often find I can spot things perhaps others can't from a different perspective. But I think overall it's an issue in terms of actually how are we able to have scrutiny on this as councillors if we don't necessarily have too many people who want to be on audit and accounts or have expertise on this. So yeah, what do you think about this, and how does it, I guess, compare across the UK?
I think that's absolutely right. There is a very good House of Commons Select Committee report last year about making local government accounts more readable, which I think is really, really useful. And actually, if I were in a local authority as a councillor, I'd be grabbing it because it has principles which local government accounts should adhere to, and I would be challenging the finance director and other people in the local authority about what they're doing to adhere to that. And also, I think there's a government role in terms of what the overall framework says. But I totally agree with you. And one of the things I think, which is a slightly separate conversation that we have to have, is how to make these things more useful and more readable and more understandable and less written for accountants.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you were first elected as a councillor, most of us have no expertise in this at all, and whatever training is provided is very, very limited, and it's only through kind of attrition of years and years of budget setting that you have, well, that I have any understanding of it. Obviously, some of my colleagues are much more experienced than me, but I really struggle. I mean, I'm an engineer by trade, so I'm very numerate, but you know, accounting is a dark art to me. And it's difficult because, you know, that's the way we elect councillors doesn't really take any consideration of that. And so we're fortunate if we have any who understand, I think is the truth. There's always a few in every local authority, but basically quite often we end up being officer led, which is not ideal.
Yeah, but what we do have is councillors that are willing to ask questions, and that's the most important thing for me. And one of the things I think is missing with local government accounts is actually, and this comes back to the value for money thing that I think was being made early on, is how does Cambridgeshire compare to Norfolk in terms of social care? We know we've got a social care problem in Cambridgeshire, but what percentage of Cambridgeshire's budget is being spent on social care compared to Norfolk? Why is the difference, and what is the difference? And it's those questions that councillors should be asking. And based on what we're hearing today, I think we're losing the ability to do it.
And also, I think to some extent, what the Commission used to do as well is publish comparative performance statistics. So you can then say, what are they spending, but also what are you getting for it? And that's the other side of it, really. And I think you're totally right. We have this wonderful instrument, and we've got to get it used in the right way so that it promotes accountability, etc.
I think one of the things, and this is why my guess why Eric got rid of it, is a lot of this stuff is seen as an overhead.
Yeah.
And you've got to move it from being an overhead to being something of value.
Yeah.
And to be able to demonstrate that it's value, and some of that has to be about how auditing puts its message across, because it became almost burdensome on local authorities, some of the comment that was coming out, and that to me is where it's got to be got right. You've got to be able to use it properly, and you've got to be able to demonstrate it.
How is it burdensome?
Because the comparative figures and things like that we used, or it almost became a comment on the performance of local authorities, and so from that perspective, it became something that was telling councils how to do, rather than giving it information.
And I think that comes back to what I was saying earlier about you can have different styles. And almost actually, there's a wonderful book by a guy called, I'm trying to remember his name. I've forgotten it. But anyway, about the Audit Commission, it's called Follow the Money. And he shows how sort of there were like even 5 or 6 audit commissions, actually. And I think some of what you're talking about is the right question, Martin. It's working out what do we want rather than abolishing and replacing. It was sort of working out what we want is the key question.
So as a resident of Cambridgeshire and as a councillor, what the questions you would ask? For me, it starts with where do we sit in this bigger picture that says the system's broken? Are my council's accounts, whether it's a district council, county council, combined authority, whether where do they sit? Have they been audited? If not, why not?
Absolutely, those questions, and I would be asking both the auditor and the finance team at the local council, or the officers, those kind of questions, and I would be asking them as well, if they haven't been audited, what progress are they making towards getting a set of audited financial statements, and when is that going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's difficult as well because there's there's a problem here. I mean, I think there is a problem. It's a real problem. We don't want to overstate it, but this is something that, I mean, I can see people in basically every council up and down the country when it comes to elections saying, "Oh, those bloody socialists didn't get the accounts done. The books are dodgy." And I can see, exactly the same. All those bloody Tories, or those bloody Liberals, or whatever it happens to be. And it's one where this is a systemic problem.
Yeah.
And it needs a systemic solution. I want to go back to something that Stephen was saying earlier on. There is a look. Town council said the levels are much smaller, but you don't really get any training. Or town council you get a little bit, not much. You get a bit more for there's also a thing that you're elected, at about 3:00 on a Friday morning. Then on Monday you go in, and it's like, "Hi, you're a councillor.
Yeah.
Please sign this piece of paper." And I suppose this is one of the reasons you need, getting rid of everybody all at once would be a problem. This may annoy Stephen, but parties are useful for institutional knowledge. But there's that is a.
By the way, that's exactly the same thing in the House of Commons. Anyway, you have exactly the same problem with MPs not understanding any of this stuff when it's presented to them. And I think one of the things maybe we need to think about more as a country is what we do, both to make stuff more accessible to the people who are supposed to be using it, but also to train those people in how to use it when they get either to become a councillor or an MP or whatever else. And I'm not sure we're that good at it. We're very good at saying, "Hello, you've been elected. Congratulations. Now you start."
Yeah, and that's the, I mean, I know that there's more that goes on. It's like you do planning. You have specific, if you want a development management, could you have specific things on that? But
it is interesting, David, and it's an interesting point that you're not allowed to make a decision on a development on a planning committee unless you've been trained, and it's mandatory that you have annual training on planning. But actually, the fundamental accounts of the council, you're not required to have any training. And yet, you think about the decisions you're making, and actually, you're supposed to be scrutinising and holding the council to account over its finances, and you don't have any training at all. It's an interesting quandary.
Well, I think at the beginning, like at least in my experience, you do have this, but again, it's optional. So like I remember in the first year, like having a training, which I attended online with officers explaining how different papers are presented and different budget tables and how to read them, and kind of the very basics of how to read what's in the committee papers, which was very useful for, especially new councillors. But then I think a lot of it's up to the individual, which I'm not sure if we should introduce something like more compulsory training like we have on planning. Because, for instance, when I got elected and I realized, okay, I actually do lack some understanding in this area, I signed up proactively myself. The LGA, Local Government Association, does like a day or like half days only on finance, where you actually look into the detail of this. Like I went to Coventry, you go to the, LGA training on that. But you have to be proactive, obviously have your own, free time to do this. And I think the reality is most people don't necessarily look very proactively at those training opportunities. They do exist. I think if you really want to improve on something, you can can have, you know, like a mentor, for example, who's more like experienced than you, like who's a counselor who's more experienced, which I had as well. You can go on those LJ courses. You can also self-study, like, you know, mainly because of my work, but I'm now actually on an accountancy, like just online course to like skill up a little bit, but which I thought it will, you know, help me for counsel as well. But I think it's really down to like the individual's willingness to get training and self-study on this, which is, yeah, you can't really hold counselors to account whether they do the training or not. You know, you can do nothing and you can, you know, still be a counselor.
There is also...
I did some mentoring as a counsellor through the LGA as an accredited peer, and I really enjoyed it, and I got a lot out of it actually. I did mentoring on planning and to a planning committee chairman. It was really, really good. The question I have about this, though, and this is, I feel the same way in some ways about planning and as I do with accounts. It's okay training people. But in order to train somebody, you need somebody to be teachable, and there are a huge number of counsellors that are not teachable, and for all sorts of reasons, either because they're old like me, Ian is one of them. So sometimes it's about being blunt about it. It's about basic intelligence, and you know, I'm going to make a political point here. The standard of the intelligence of some of the UKIP councillors that we had in 2013 was absolutely dire at the county council, but actually you see more of that at district councils, and I see councils up and down sort of the country, and so there's two issues. You know, one is, yes, train people. The other one is, are people teachable?
I mean, I actually was going to say on the self-study issue, being able to self-study is actually a skill, and it's something you have, you know, to be given a sort of, you know, a course pack or an online resource and be told, right, go away and learn that's actually a skill that you have to develop over time.
Yeah, I agree. Also, like, I think there's also very little incentive for many people, because unlike, I don't know, me having, let's say, a full-time paid job and then having to think like, well, I have to improve on my skills and go to some professional development, being a counselor, having, you know, for most people of working age, having a job alongside it leaves very little time to actually think, yes, I would actually invest in my professional development, in understanding the audit and accounts committee more, as opposed to, I don't know, spending my 3 hours free this week improving on my job alongside my counsel's role. So it is like a really difficult to actually like find, even if you are enthusiastic about and know how to, like, you know, do some self-learning to actually do that.
But it's important you do it, and you know, it's important that councils do invest in developing counsellors, and a lot of councils, it's one of the budgets that got absolutely slashed. So I know that as an example, I think you're doing some leadership stuff at the moment, Alex, and I did a number of different leadership academies. I've really enjoyed them, but the council budgets and those courses started to really struggle because councils weren't invested in training counsellors. And you know, for me, as somebody that runs my own business, I invest in my own training. I actually do it through BBC Maestro. It's a reality, but you know, I have to invest in me as a businessman, and counsellors and councils, you know, should be investing in themselves as well. And so there is a question to be asked, because that's how you develop the knowledge and you develop the ability to challenge. And you know, the Leadership Academy stuff. I went to the Leadership Academy. I learned more from chatting to other counsellors, probably on the Leadership Academy, than I did from the actual course material itself, because it gives you an external view, and a lot of councils are very internal in their perspective about what they do.
Sorry.
And a lot of this, I think, so a lot of this stuff around, you know, audit and compliance things was developed in the 80s because of scandals which go back to the 60s and the 70s, like the Paulson affair. And I think one of the other things about this is it is in everyone's self-interest to understand it, but probably that self-interest is something you only get to once you've gone for, once it's too late, once the bad things have started to happen.
Yeah.
That is where I fear we are now. I have to say, I fear that. I don't think this story, even though it's been picked up as a combined authority issue, I don't think this story is a Cambridgeshire story. But I do feel that we're at sort of at the thin end of wedge thing, that councils are not getting their audits done. It's the beginning of a story that says, some of these audits are bad. And then questions being asked. And I'd rather those questions were asked now, actually, and we start picking it up early. But I fear that we've got worse coming down the line.
I mean, this is. I'm honestly not trying to make a massive partisan point here, but I'm going to make a massive partisan point. I think there's quite a few things. I think we probably agree there were problems over the last 14 years. I don't think government was always great. We've also had some huge challenges: Brexit, COVID, inflation, all the rest of it. At the same time as needing to deliver services better, we need to rebuild how those services are delivered and the whole infrastructure behind it, and that's a big ask. That's a lot. A lot to sort of put together.
There is a party political point to be made here, because it was the Conservatives that made these changes, but it's also true that you have to sit it in perspective, and the perspective is the finances that the government were in 2010. When the decisions around, the audit commission and whatever were made, and there's a reality about priorities. And I think that if we weren't seeing the benefit that was coming from an audit system, in terms of what it delivers for councils, in terms of learning and stuff like that, and it was becoming something that was dictatorial, you can see the sense in which somebody would go, "We don't need this."
Yeah.
But we're also getting to a point now where, with the benefit of hindsight, you can look and say, actually, we needed this.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I think there's. I know. I agree with you. Remember that, and again, this goes back to the financial crisis and so on. The sort of formative period of when I became sort of politically aware of the world was the end of Major and Blair, which was actually quite okay. Iraq happened, 9/11, but in the UK, we had a buoyant economy. That makes life easier for people who are the age I was then. Now you've had 15 years or more of crap. Basically, is that fair? And I suppose there's, because of when the world I sort of became aware of felt like an optimistic place, and it doesn't now.
I think there is something in the idea that we have had clearly a problem with growth, and I'm not an economist, but clearly we have had that over the last couple of years, and over the last 15, 16 years, and we haven't recovered as other countries have from the financial crisis, and we haven't recovered from COVID in the same way. And there's some really quite deep questions there about that. I think one of the issues here is about government's a really complicated system, and it's not that it doesn't need reform. I can totally accept that the Audit Commission might have needed reform in 2010. But one of the things I think that if I were advising a new government on any of this, I would be advising them to do would be to think carefully about what you do in terms of that reform. So abolishing the Audit Commission clearly has led to big problems. Reforming it might have actually not led to these problems. So this is a question that goes to how sensitively, how thoughtfully reform is done, how kind of carefully you kind of cut into and remove the bit that you don't like.
I sort of agree with that, Henry, but there is this point that, and this is more dealing actually with David's political point, that we were in 2010 to 2014 in a position where it wasn't about how do we make this better, it was about how do we save money. And I think that is the context in which we came to power. So the Conservatives, I say we, I'm not Conservative anymore, came to power in 2010 was in that context, and decisions were made in that context. And there is a reality though that we haven't ever recovered from austerity, because we were starting to move out of it when COVID hit.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. I mean, also I think the way, I mean, I get I think, look, the financial the situation we were in when the Conservatives came to power was pretty grim. It was. I think the difference is how you get out of that. I mean, partly, because we'd had the sort of financial crisis and so on. There was an opportunity then to grow the economy, and I suppose that rates to borrow money then were lower. And the thing is, like, I get the austerity. It's like we've got to balance the books, and probably had to be some of that. But the level of austerity and the speed at which it came in, we've seen this with the effects it's had on the idea was that the big society would come in to replace that. It didn't, and in some places you've ended up with and at the same time you've had the sort of I'm thinking specifically of children's homes, social care. We've also had the growth of particular kinds of private finance to invest in those, and you've ended up with quite a lot of problems. What the Conservatives inherited in 2010. Let's be honest, it was not good. But is the question then is I'm not sure. This may be a sort of fundamental difference. I'm not sure the way we're going to try to get out of it was the right one.
But where there's a case to say that where we are now with the government we've got now and the outlook and the perspective government have got, which is almost the different perspective, which is to spend our way out of debt by making growth happen. This is where, to a certain extent, because it can never be perfect, you can prove that point or otherwise. And that's effectively where we are now. This government will live or die on whether the way it is spending delivers growth.
Yep.
There are also, I think, and this is one of the really interesting questions going back, and I think something we need to think a lot more about. There's a kind of long-term, short-term issue here. So one of the things that the Conservatives did in 2010, or after 2010, was introduce measures that actually made the long-term fiscal position really worse. So the triple lock would be a great example. And I think one of the things as a country we need to do is to step back and think about the long-term fiscal position versus the short-term, and almost not like what we are cutting, whether we are cutting and whether we are spending. That's an important question. But also what we are doing in terms of the shape of our state, like where that money goes and what happens to it, because I think we don't often have that conversation.
I absolutely
Part of the reason is
okay. I think I'm just
about the numbers, right?
I just want to make a point about this.
Yeah.
It's really important, David. Sorry, I know you're probably going to intervene and end today, but there is a really important point. You've got governments are elected for 5 years, councils are elected for 4 years.
Yeah.
The decisions they need to make should be looking 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And there's a real quandary with that.
It is one of the questions, for example, the questions councillors should ask, on scrutiny. One of the questions I rarely get answers to because of how, short term many of our budgets are, is how much we would have saved in the long term if you chose, let's say, the in-house option over this contracted option, or like a number of other options, and you don't know, and you don't necessarily have the capacity to do a proper study or be able to predict, okay, how much I'll be able to save in 20 years time if I actually invested in this public health initiative or put more budget into public health, as opposed to cutting it a little bit to balance the budget this year, for example. And this is really challenging because of the short-term decisions and also the political cycle as well, which influences those spending decisions as well.
I'm going to cut across there because various people saying they need to go to work. Just before we finish, Henry, thank you for coming on. Let's say that I wanted to find out, about the history of the NAO.
Oh, yeah.
Can you recommend any books on there?
Yes. So there's one coming out on Tuesday.
Tell us about your book.
Yeah, so it comes out on Tuesday, and it really covers, I suppose, not just what the NAO is, but what government accountability has meant. So you go from a 19th century approach where basically government accountability means sticking to what Parliament tells you to do. So my favourite example there is a school who was told its spending on a football was illegal because football wasn't in the Education Act of 1862, to a world in which that's much less important, and we're thinking about government accountability all being about efficient management or the transparent production of data. So it's charting really the development of government accountability and the development of democracy itself through the history of the NAO.
Brilliant.
So yeah, please, it will be out on Tuesday, I think. So anyone who has who wishes to develop more expertise in the area, go and get it.
When it comes out on Tuesday, we'll share that on our socials.
Cool.
Henry, thank you for coming on. I've got very few people saying they need to go to work.
Yes.
It's been a really interesting discussion and really good, to have a real expert on to talk about it. We'll probably be talking next week, I don't know, possibly about the fallout from Lou Haig resigning, because she was doing things around buses and trains. And I think we're going to be starting to look forward to the combined authority elections, because the Conservatives have chosen Paul Bristow as their candidate for the mayorals. And I think it'd be good to try and get all of the candidates on so they can sort of say their piece. I think that's everything from us. Have a lovely weekend and see you all in the future.
Thank you. See you next week.